one of the classrooms you can't connect to. For the stream, we're doing them up. We can't figure out where the mic table might be. Even you did on the podium one. I was testing the podium one. It's fine.
Okay, so we're in Jeremiah. We've been working our way through our material, and I don't remember what I did study, I just never remember what the chapter is in our workbook. It's lesson 21 is where we're going to be. Lesson 21, okay? That's chapters, it's actually a lot of stuff. You can see it up there. It's a lot of chapters we have to get through. So tonight's class is going to be kind of a big picture, 30,000 feet type of thing. And, you know, we can, certainly I want to stop and make comments along the way and, you know, get your comments and your input. But we're probably going to have to go pretty quickly through a lot of this stuff just to make sure we stay on task. Because we really don't have a whole lot of time left this quarter. We've got a couple weeks, and we've got a couple lessons we still have to get through. So we might actually finish Jeremiah and Lamentations. We might actually do it in one quarter. So this is where we're going to be looking. Jeremiah 45 through 49 tonight. Big picture view, but certainly we'll stop and make comments along the way. Let's start with a word of prayer, and we'll get going. Our wonderful and almighty God in heaven, thank you so much. What a beautiful, beautiful time of year this is. And we thank you for this beautiful world in which we live. We love the color green. We love to be able to look around this time of year and see life springing anew, flowers and trees and the grass and all the creatures that surround us, as well as our own sense of renewal as we face this beautiful, warm, sunny time of year. We pray that you watch over us in all that we do as a church, in all of our classes, and the great work we do in preaching the gospel. Be with our elders and our deacons, all of the people who serve in some way in this congregation, even the little things that get done behind the scenes. We're thankful for that. And finally, help us to have a great class and make a good application as we see fit as we go through this text. Help us to keep our eyes on the text. Help us to love the Word and to be respectful of the Word. We pray that we would be engaged this evening in that most important endeavor. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we're getting near the end of the book of Jeremiah. The narrative section is essentially over. There's one more chapter at the end of the book that gives us a little bit more of the history in the story. But now we've got a whole bunch of chapters in a row of prophecy again, right? We're gonna hit the prophecy really, really hard. Now, we're looking 30,000 feet here at a whole bunch of chapters all at the same time. Chapter 45, though, how long is chapter 45? Does that kind of stand out a little bit? Kind of a squirrely little chapter there, just a few verses. Here's my theory, okay, and you don't have to agree. It's just one guy's theory. My theory is that this last part of the book is part of the book that Baruch, his scribe, put together much earlier in the story. Remember, there was a story that we looked at where Baruch was told to write down the prophecy of God. This is all the way back in chapter 36, okay? And it says in 36, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, okay? And we're given a very similar kind of timestamp here during the time of Jehoiakim. And remember back in chapter 36, Baruch was told, write down Jeremiah's words and then go, present them. Take them to the temple, preach them in front of the people. And the priests and the scribes heard it, and they took it to the king, and the king heard it. What did Jehoiakim the king think about Jeremiah's prophesying? He was not crazy about it back in chapter 36. In fact, he took a scribus knife and sliced Jeremiah's prophecies all to pieces, and then he took the pieces and he threw them into the fire pit to burn them. And he said, that'll teach Jeremiah to preach doom and gloom right now. And that's the same time, the 4th year of Jehoiakim, same timestamp as we're getting here in chapter 45. So I think 45 through 49 is the collection of some of the things that Baruch wrote at that time. Because it's not rosy, right? You read these chapters, it's not rosy. This is not good news that are, that's being preached here in 45 through 49. So that's just my theory, kind of connecting the dots a little bit. That's kind of what I think is going on. Chapter 45, the main point of chapter 45 is Jeremiah and God are expressing to Baruch, the scribe, that, you've sacrificed a lot, you've done a lot, you've worked very hard. If you just stay faithful to God, you will have your life at the end of all of this, right? When you look up and all is said and done, and Nebuchadnezzar has done his thing, and it's been chaos, and your whole world has fallen apart around you, he says, you will have your life. He says in verse 5, I will give your life to you as a booty or a war prize in all the places that you may go. He's essentially saying, listen, Baruch, you've done a great job. You've been a scribe. You've worked really, really hard. You've sacrificed a lot. You've been with Jeremiah through thick and thin. Now at this point, right at the end, right, or at least with the end on the horizon, don't go seeking great things. Don't try to find the comfortable life. Don't try to go find wealth and things of this world. Trust God. Stick to the message that you've been a part of this whole time, and you will live through this whole thing. So I thought it's just a neat little, even though it's a very short chapter, it's a neat little message that God didn't forget Baruch, and neither did Jeremiah. Okay, so as we proceed into the next chapter now, in chapter 46, we're given a series of prophecies against the nations, and it's a number of nations are addressed. If you want to, if you like to write in your Bible, or if you're taking notes or something, here's your big picture. Chapter 46 is about the Egyptians, and that absolutely came true. Pharaoh Necho is defeated in a great battle, Battle of Carchemish in, was it 605 BC? I think it's when Carchemish took place. He's defeated in battle against the Babylonians, and then one of his successors, Pharaoh Hophra, is finally once and for all defeated in 570 BC. And so you have these successive pharaohs that try to rise up against Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, and they fail. One after another, they keep failing. So chapter 46 is all about the Egyptians and a prophecy of doom against them. Chapter 47 is a prophecy against the Philistines. Okay? The longtime rivals of the Israelites, the Philistines, this is one of the last times that they get mentioned. If not, you may correct me if you can find another reference in your concordance. I didn't pull out a concordance, but this might be the last reference to the Philistines in the Old Testament. Maybe. If someone's got a concordance handy, find that out. Find out if there's any other Philistine references. This may be one of the last references to the Philistines in the Old Testament. Chapter 48 is a message for the Moabites. We'll talk about those old Moabites. We've been talking about the Moabites for a long time. Chapter 49 is all about the Ammonites. Again, the Ammonites, these long-time rivals for Israel. Chapter 49, beginning in verse 7, is about the Edomites. Edomites are actually related to the Israelites distantly. We'll talk about that. And then he gets, in chapter 49 and verse 23, he talks about Damascus, or essentially Syria is what it's talking about. Chapter 49, verse 28, talks about the city of Hazor and the Hazorites. And then chapter 49 and verse 34 is talking about Elam. Elam, which is an extremely ancient, one of the most ancient civilizations in that part of the world. And so there's a prophecy against the Elamites. So there's your big picture view, okay? Everybody on the same page? There's your big picture. And I brought maps. Who was in the Old Testament geography class last quarter? Okay, all right. So some of these are new maps even for you. And if you weren't in the Old Testament geography class, then great. I'm reusing some of the maps, so they'll be new to you, to everybody. Okay, so at the time, this is kind of what we're looking at as far as the broader world that Jeremiah lives in. You have Babylon over here. That's their capital city of Babylon, the great, great city of Babylon. Babylon essentially kind of sits between these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Tigris and the Euphrates run right here, and that's modern-day Iraq. Okay, this is essentially modern-day Iraq. This is modern-day Iran over here. Okay, and you've got Syria, Jordan, Israel, Egypt. Okay, that's kind of your modern day. So you got the Babylonians over here in their capital city of Babylon, the very ancient civilization of Assyria, longtime enemies of Israel, and longtime rivals of Egypt as well. But then there's the old Egypt down here. Egypt is kind of the old guard. Okay, that's the old guard empire, and right in the middle, right the highway between all these things, there's Jerusalem. It's not on the map, I get it, but Jerusalem's right here. Okay, the Philistine cities are right here. Jerusalem's right here. Megiddo was a stronghold up in the northern area of Israel. Okay, Damascus is the capital city of the Syrians. Tyre and Sidon, where the Sidonians are. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Babylon took over. They fought against Assyria. They fought against Egypt. The Battle of Carchemish was Egypt and Assyria shaking hands and saying, now I don't like you, and you don't like me, and we haven't liked each other for a long time. But neither of us like Babylon. So I'll tell you what, just this one time, you help me and I'll help you, and we're going to deal with these Babylonians, okay? And the Assyrians and the Egyptians actually were going to band together to fight the Babylonians. Problem was, the Egyptians didn't mobilize in time. They were a little bit slow, and Babylon was able to conquer Assyria by itself and then Egypt in a climactic battle that took place in Carchemish. Carchemish is a very, very, very ancient city. It was a city of the Hittites at one point, I think. And so that climactic battle happens there at Carchemish. And so Babylon has defeated Assyria. They've defeated Egypt. So that's what's going on. Now, we're not at that point yet. I'm just saying that's what happened. So the Egyptians. That's the map I want. Oh, look, I even had a map that showed where Carchemish was and all the things I just said. So, there you go. What's Josiah's problem, by the way? He's caught up in the middle of all this, because if Egypt wants to go play games up here with Assyria and Babylon, they want to go play games, where does Egypt have to go?
In the middle.
Whoop, right in the middle, because what's over here? A massive wasteland with nothing but sand and like skeletons. That's it. Just death. It's just dry. It's the desert. And so the only way you can go if you've got an army of 100,000 soldiers is you got to go where there's water, shade, fodder for your animals, that sort of thing. So it just basically takes them right through Josiah's backyard, and Josiah says, you're not going through my backyard. He decided to meddle in things that were way above his pay grade, and Josiah ends up getting killed at a battle at Megiddo while Egypt is on its way up to Carchemish. Okay? Now are we ready? See, there's another picture here. This is Carchemish, by the way, the ancient city. It was a Hittite city. This is what's left of it here. You can see the outlines of buildings and walls and everything like that. So, there you go. I'm not ready for that one yet. I want to talk about the Egyptians first. So, ignore what's on there. Okay, the Egyptians. What do you do with an entire chapter on the Egyptians? First of all, we talked a little bit last week, and I really liked some of the comments that were brought up about this, about what Egypt always represented. Egypt to Israel always represented the way back, right? It was always back there. When things weren't looking good, they would always say, well, we could always go back to Egypt. Things were better back in Egypt. Remember in the wilderness wanderings? They were a little parched, a little bit hungry. Things were not what they thought they'd be. The journey was a little harder than they thought it would be. And they kept saying, well, remember back in Egypt. Back in Egypt, they treated us so great when we were slaves making mud bricks. They treated us so great back in Egypt, and we had all the food that we ever wanted. Egypt was always this, like, back there kind of thing. And Jeremiah repeatedly warns them in his prophecies about don't go to Egypt. Egypt is not where your salvation is. Looking forward toward God is always where salvation is. Don't go back to Egypt. And so I think it's interesting, even all the way back in the time of Jehoiakim, so we're like 15 years back in time now, okay, from where we were last week with Zedekiah, okay? Even 15 years before, Jeremiah was repeatedly telling them, don't go back to Egypt. Don't go back to Egypt. Jehoiakim and the others hated that idea because they always felt like Egyptian help was kind of in their back pocket. Like we could always depend on the Egyptians to come and help us. I mean, it makes sense. If you go back to the other, the previous one here, it makes sense. Egypt is always going to be competing against these other powers, right? These Near Eastern powers. Because there's always a balance. I mean, it's just like in our world today, right? You got to balance. If one country has nukes, the other one's got to have nukes. If one country wants to, demilitarize something, the other's got to demilitarize something. There's always tit for tat when it comes to these world powers. And so Egypt at different times, viewed Judah and Israel as a useful ally. It was a buffer zone. It was a trading partner. And the Israelites also viewed Egypt the same way. They could always, just like Abraham did, when there was a famine, they could always go down to Egypt and get grain and trade for things. And it was a bustling, busy empire. And so they always kind of had this understanding. We've got each other in our back pocket. And Assyria and Babylon upset that whole thing. And God repeatedly told them, stop looking to Egypt for your salvation. I mean, even, this is a little obscure, so sorry about being too obscure here. But remember Solomon, great Solomon, all that wealth and everything? When Solomon wanted to build up his army, he thought, I want some chariots, I want some horsemen, because, real empires have chariots and horsemen. You know where he bought all of his horses from? Egypt. He bought all of his horses from Egypt. Right? So even Solomon, with all of his wealth and all of his wisdom, just couldn't look past the allure of Egypt. Oh, Solomon, who was his first wife? An Egyptian, Pharaoh's daughter, right? I mean, even right there, even Solomon, with all his wealth and wisdom, just couldn't avert his gaze entirely from the allure. Egypt was just always down there, wealthy, exotic, right? Grain, money, food. They just couldn't look past it. And so the message here against Egypt is, I'll give you a sampling of it. If you skip on to verse 14, declare in Egypt and proclaim in Migdol, proclaim also in Memphis and Tahpanhes, say, take your stand and get yourself ready, for the sword has devoured those around you. Why have your mighty ones become prostrate? They do not stand because the Lord has thrust them down. They have repeatedly stumbled. Indeed, they've fallen one against the other. Then they said, get up and let us go back to our own people and our native land, away from the sword of the oppressor. They cried there, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is but a big noise. He's let the appointed time pass by. As I live, declares the Lord, whose name is the Lord of hosts, surely one shall come, who looms up like Tabor among the mountains, or like Carmel by the sea. Make your baggage ready for exile, O daughter dwelling in Egypt, for Memphis will become a desolation, not our Memphis, don't worry. It will even be burned down and bereft of inhabitants. I don't like reading that about Memphis personally. Egypt is, look at what he says in verse 20 now. Egypt is a pretty heifer, but a horsefly is coming from the north. It's coming! I like New American Standard. I said this last week. I love New American Standard's punctuation choices sometimes. They put an exclamation point there after that. Egypt is a pretty heifer. She's a beautiful cow. It's a big, beautiful, luxurious cow. But a horsefly is coming from the north. It is coming! like you're going to put an exclamation point there. What he's saying is, Egypt looks the part. It's this big, sleek, luxurious heifer, right? And he's not making fun of cows. He's saying Egypt is a big, beautiful... You ever seen Like, I like cows. I think cows are awesome. I think cows are better than horses, personally. Cows are beautiful. Man, cows are beautiful.
Horses are beautiful.
Horses are beautiful. My grandpa bred Appaloosas. I've got a soft spot in my heart for horses.
Kentucky now, thoroughbreds.
I know. But you ever seen those like Swiss milking cows? They are so gorgeous. I mean, they're just like that beautiful light brown and those big beautiful dark eyes, and they have eyelashes. Swiss milking cows have eyelashes. Like, there's just something so beautiful about it. Now he's saying Egypt is that. Egypt is beautiful. Egypt, it's got the Nile, and it's got palm trees, and the big palaces, and all the money, and the gold, and the pharaohs, and everyone's got eyeliner on. It's like in the old movies, right? But he says, watch out. A single fly is coming. And that one fly will take Egypt down. One fly. That's it. Just one horsefly. He's saying Egypt is pretty and it looks the part, but a single horsefly from the north is going to come and will take Egypt down. That's how insubstantial they are. They come with a lot of huff and a lot of puff, right? Come with a lot of huff and a lot of puff, but they are defeated by the Babylonians multiple times, and they prove to be a very unstable and unsteady ally. So I think that's a really, really powerful way to look at it. And it says that her mercenaries in her midst are like fattened calves, for even they too have turned back and fled away together. They did not stand their ground. Egypt had hired out, they had hired mercenaries from multiple other places, from Ethiopia, which on a map would be down here, from Lydia. Lydia is kind of up in here, I think. I believe Lydia at that time was up here. So they had hired out mercenary soldiers. And he says, your mercenaries are going to abandon you in your time of need. So don't listen to Egypt. Don't fall for the allure of Egypt. That's the point of chapter 46. Anything else you want to bring up before we move on? Okay, chapter 47 is about the Philistines. Ooh, the Philistines have been around a long time, haven't they? Those Philistines, we met them a long, long time ago in the Old Testament. They've always been a problem for Israel. So the Philistines were a seafaring people. In fact, the Egyptians called them the seafaring people. That was, I believe that I don't have it right in front of me, but the term that the Egyptians used to describe the Philistines was not Philistine. But the term that they used in their Egyptian language, I think, literally meant people from the sea. So some historians believe that the Philistines may have been distantly related to Greeks, right? That they were maybe some kind of Greek-related type people, some people from the Aegean area, the Aegean Sea, and that they were traders and they were seafarers, and they came across this beautiful open land. And they landed here, and the shores here, they're wide open, sweeping shores, and there's this area called the Shephelah, from the sea up to the Judean foothills. This whole area right here is called the Shephelah, and it's this beautiful, beautiful, wide open, grassy land. And I'll tell you, if you're a seagoing people, and you're tired of being out on the sea, never knowing where your kids are going to grow up, and you just want to settle in and become, let's raise cattle, let's have farms, let's have children, let's plant our roots. You're not going to find a better place than right here. That's beautiful. It's a fertile crescent, after all. So, the Philistines are probably, that's kind of where their story comes from, okay? But the Philistines were always a thorn in the side of the people around them, because since they were from probably the Aegean Sea, Greek, they had some technology that nobody else had. They knew how to work iron. Nobody else around here knew how to work iron, but the Philistines did. So they were able to make iron implements, iron tools, and iron chariots that kind of put them a leg up over everybody around them. So they were definitely a warrior people with a technology that nobody else was able to replicate, and that's why the Philistines were always problems for the Israelites, as well as the Canaanites around them. Okay? So he pronounces a judgment against them here in chapter 47. He says, waters are going to rise from the north. They'll become an overflowing torrent and overflow the land and all of its fullness. Who's coming from the north? Talking about the Babylonians here, okay? And watch out! Don't put your trust in your big cities. The Philistines had like very large, centers of population, high walls, well defended. In particular, they had 5 cities. They were called the 5 royal cities of the Philistines. It was Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Who's the most famous person to come from Gath? Goliath. Yeah, Goliath came from Gath. There you go. So there's a warning for the Philistines also. Probably if I can sum it up, verses 6 and 7 sum it up. Ah, sword of the Lord, how long will you not be quiet? Withdraw into your sheath, be at rest and stay still. How can it be quiet when the Lord has given it an order? That's kind of chilling, isn't it? We're tired, when is God's sword going to be done? It'll be done when the Lord's done. When the Lord orders his sword to go out and do what it does, it'll do what it does. You know what I like a little bit about this section? We talk about the Philistines and the Moabites and the Ammonites and all these people. For generations, the Israelites were so scared of them, right? They were so scared of the Philistines. Oh, the Philistines are coming. We're terrified of the Philistines. And yet, for as powerful as the Philistines were, they're no match when it comes to God. And eventually, they're no match for God's chosen implement of punishment. You think the Philistines are so bad. Why don't you check out those Babylonians? Like the Philistines, let's be real about this, all of these Canaanite nations. You're talking Philistines, Canaanites, you're talking the Moabites and Ammonites and Amorites and Amalekites. Let's be real about this. Even David and Solomon, at their very, very, very best, they were small fries on the international scene. You compare what they did to... Stop it. You compare Israel or Philistia or Moab to Assyria or the Hittite Empire or the ancient Sumerians or the Babylonians or the Persians or the Elamites or the Egyptians. They were always small fries. So I think sometimes my practical lesson would be sometimes the people or the things that we fear the most really aren't as powerful as we think that they are. Anyway, so we get to chapter 48. Look at how quickly we're going through this. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Stop me and make a comment somewhere along the way. I'd be happy to listen to someone else talk. Chapter 48 is all about the Moabites. Where do the Moabites come from? Anybody know where the Moabites come from?
Lot's family.
Yeah, Lot's family. That's right. The Moabites come from Lot's family. They were... And not under the best circumstances. Remember, Lot was living in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we all know that blew up in his face. There's probably a pun about his wife and salt or something like that. We don't want to pour salt in his wounds right now. Yeah, that's right. You want to pour salt in his wounds. So after Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot shuts down. And admittedly, seeing everything that happened, hearing the destruction behind you, knowing that your wife has been left behind as a pillar of salt, all the friends that you had made, your livelihood, your business, your wealth, you've left it all behind. If that happened to any of us, we would probably have a nervous breakdown also. I think Lot legitimately, and I'm not making fun, I'm not being silly, I think Lot legitimately has a nervous breakdown after Sodom and Gomorrah. Because where does he go and live? Anybody remember? Where does he live with his 2 daughters? In a cave. And he won't let them go out anywhere. And they say, well, can we get married? Because, we're not old spinsters or anything, and we'd like to go live a life. And he would not let them go get married. Because I think, legitimately, the guy had a nervous breakdown. And he's living in a cave with his 2 daughters, just kind of shut down. And his 2 daughters want to live life. They want to get married. They want to have kids. But they go about it the worst, most disgusting, weirdest way possible. They get Lot drunk. They have sex with him. And they have babies with their dad. Very twisted, very weird. And one of them ends up being the beginning of the household of Moab. So that's where the Moabites come from. But that doesn't mean every single Moabite was gross and disgusting and weird, because do we meet a few Moabites along the way that are pretty awesome? Who in particular? Ruth. Yeah, Ruth is from Moab. Ruth is a Moabitess. So, just that's a great lesson there. Just because you're a Moabite doesn't mean that you're like, your life is somehow like predestined. Just because you're a Philistine doesn't mean your life is predestined. Just because you're a whatever, just because maybe you were born into terrible circumstances, or you had a horrible upbringing, or there's a lot of social pressures for you to be one thing or another thing. I get that. But Ruth illustrates just when you set your mind on following God, your whole life is going to change, and it will always, eventually, and eternally be for the better. But the Moabites as a group, and so we're talking as a group, not as individuals, because there's certainly plenty of good individual Moabites, but as a group, as a civilization, he says in chapter 48, verse 1, "Woe to Nebo, for it has been destroyed. Kiriathaim has been put to shame, it has been captured. The lofty stronghold has been put to shame and shattered. There is praise for Moab no longer. In Heshbon they've devised calamity against her. Come and let us cut her off from being a nation. You too, madmen, will be silenced. The sword will follow after you." So it's pretty much devastation and great destruction in verse 3. Moab is broken in verse 4. Verse 7, "For because of your trust in your own achievements and treasures, even you yourself will be captured. And Chemosh will go into exile together with his priests and his princes." Oh, well, let's talk about Chemosh a little bit here. Chemosh was one of the gods that the Moabites worshipped, and he's this statue right here. And they found little figurines. They found little figurines. His arms, he didn't have arms on it. His arms were empty right there. But there are some figurines where the arms are empty, which may mean that somebody could have been inside of the statue, and those are human arms, like coming through the statue, right? And so he's got like arms. He's inside a statue, waving his arms around, playing Chemosh. And what they would do is they would place babies into Chemosh's arms. And you think Chemosh was tickling them? What do you think ended up happening to those babies in Chemosh's arm? Well, child sacrifice. Okay? I just want to re-emphasize. Anytime we read the book of Joshua and we go, oh, it's so awful. Joshua went to the land of Canaan and he conquered all these people. They're just innocent people minding their own business. Well, they burned babies. Okay? They were baby burning bad. So I guess I don't have a ton of sympathy, because the Moabites were judged by God, because this is the level of depravity that they had reached. Slitting babies' throats and offering them as sacrifices to Chemosh and to Molech and the other disgusting, horrible gods. And you get it then, when the Israelites start worshiping these idols, you understand why God is so mad about it. It's bad enough that they've left God to follow an idol. But the fact that the idol also requires them to slice babies open and burn them as sacrifices, it's like one thing, if your girlfriend leaves you for someone else, and you go, well, no, it was bound to happen. She put her glasses on and realized what I looked like, I guess. But then when your girlfriend leaves you for a guy who's in prison for 17 murders, you're kind of upset about that, right? I think it provides perspective of why God is so angry when the Israelites follow after idolatry. It's not because they were going like this to a golden calf. That's not why God was mad. I mean, he was mad about that, of course. But it's because these idols represented the debauchery and depravity of an extreme and disgusting kind that, like Jeremiah says, remember we counted it 3 times. 3 times in the book of Jeremiah, when God talks about child sacrifice, what is the phrase he uses? 3 different times. He says, I never commanded you to do this. It didn't even cross my mind. Yeah. It didn't even enter my mind for you to offer children as sacrifices. It's so depraved and disgusting. So that's the Moabites. So when he pronounces judgment against the Moabites, you'll notice something. The judgment against the Moabites is the longest one in these 5 chapters. You get the Egyptians, you get the Philistines. The Moabites is the whole chapter. And then chapter 49 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Has 5 different prophecies. But all of chapter 48 is the Moabites. And it just gives you an idea of, yep, the ones that were offering babies as sacrifices, God has a lot to say to you. And it's not good. It's not good. And he says in verse 13, if you're going to highlight anything, like if we're going to point one thing out about this chapter, I think the best phrase that sums it up is verse 13. And Moab will be ashamed of Chemosh as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. Like, when you see the judgment coming, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for what it brought. Okay, then we get to chapter 49. He starts
Right.
up with,
Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Verse 47, though, after all that, and as bad as
Yes,
they were,
good point.
yet I will restore the fortunes of Moab.
Yes. Yeah. In the latter days, I'll restore the fortunes of Moab. And the writer of our class book, as well as a number of other writers, framed this in a messianic context. Like, it makes the most sense to think of it as there's a messianic hope, even for the Moabites. In fact, if you think about it this way, Moab in some sense is saved because of Ruth. Because Ruth is a part of the line of Jesus. I mean, she's part of, because it's Ruth and Boaz, and then Jesse was their grandson, and David was his son. And so David would be their great-grandson, I think. Yeah, if I'm remembering that right. Yeah, because it was, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, then David. Yeah. And then Jesus, on down the line. And so in some way, because Ruth is literally a part of the line of Jesus, literally a part of his DNA, and even in some teeny tiny minuscule way, is literally a part of Jesus' DNA. I think that's just frames this, I think, in a very messianic way. That Moab will find a kind of redemption at some point in the latter days. I may be overthinking it. Sorry if I'm overthinking it, but I'm glad you pointed that out, Jeff. I meant to bring up verse 47 because it has a little ray of hope there. Kurt, you want to add something also?
I guess your map had just hit me there. I'm looking at the scale of 20 miles in Hammon, Egypt, and the march that's going to be undertaken by the Babylonians. Mm-hmm. And he points out, and going back to 48 or 47, I guess, that they're going to be like grasshoppers. Mm-hmm. So innumerable that they cannot be counted. This is a massive, massive army. God's tool.
Yeah.
And he's taking no prisoners.
Yeah. Yeah.
That just hit me on the size. You look at it, just take a step back. Geographically, it's unreal.
Well, I think we forget sometimes, and I tried to point this out in my geography class last quarter, that where most of the Bible story takes place is really, really a small area. It's really small. And so when you talk about like these Babylonian and Assyrian armies coming with 100,000 soldiers, which would not have been unreasonable. If you included all of the soldiers, the horsemen and cavalry, people on chariots, as well as people in the baggage train and servants that come along to assist. I mean, it honestly, history shows it was not an unreasonable thing for an army to swell to 100,000 people on these like large-scale campaigns. And if you're talking 100,000 people in a 20-mile square type of area, like that's a big area. I mean, that's like almost 3 times the amount of people that live in the city of Olive Branch. And that's the size of these armies that were coming and duking it out with each other. These Egyptian and Assyrian and massive, massive Babylonian armies. These 100,000 plus type armies. So yeah, you're right. They would have filled the land. They would have absolutely filled the land. Okay, so Ammon, the Ammonites, he mentions their chief idol is Malcolm in New American Standard. Other translations call it Milcom. I think it just depends on how it's spelled. But he mentions Milcom in verse 1 and also down in verse 3. And he says in verse 3, "For Milcom will go into exile together with all of his priests and all of his princes. How boastful you are about your valleys! But your valley is flowing away, O backsliding daughter who trusts in her treasures." The reason why he mentions the valleys is the Jabbok River. The Jabbok River cuts this like ravine right through the middle of the land. You can see it from a satellite even. It's so obvious because this is all just desert. Like this is flat desert, and then there's this river that just cuts a canyon right through the land. And then as the Jabbok starts to split off more, heading toward the Jordan, you get kind of down here, just these ravines, right? This labyrinth of ravines. And the Ammonites thought, if an army comes here, we just go hide in the canyons. We know our way through it, but they don't. We'll just hide in the canyons till they leave. And he says, you put your trust in canyons. Oh, how boastful you are about your canyons and valleys. And it will all be destroyed. Terror will come upon you from all directions, he says in verse 5. Now we go to the Edomites in the next section. Where do the Edomites come from? Esau. That's right, Esau. The word Edom means red. That's what the word Edom means, is red. And it's a play on words because Esau's hair was red. He had red hair on his arms and his back and everything. And he also got rid of his birthright for what? For a bowl of that red stuff. That's what he said. Yeah, I want a bowl of that red stuff. I'll give you anything you want for a bowl of that red stuff. And so it's a play on words. And the Edomites, I don't think, on some level, I think the Edomites did not care to have that thrown back at them by the Israelites. The Edomites and the Israelites did not like each other. Like they did not like each other the way that Jacob and Esau did not like each other. They were twin brothers, born from the same womb, but as different can be. And Israel and Edom were the same way. Edom is mentioned, if you want to have a more expanded judgment against Edom, I recommend reading the book of Obadiah, the shortest book in the Old Testament. Obadiah is all about the eventual judgment against Edom, though just be aware, Obadiah is not taking place in the same time period as Jeremiah. Obadiah was like 130 years or so before Jeremiah, but still, read Obadiah if you want to learn a little bit more about the Edomites and their judgment. I had so many other things I wanted to show you. I had other maps. The Elamites were a very, very, very ancient civilization, even more ancient than the Babylonians, but the Elamites proved to be a worthless ally because the Babylonians defeated them. And I have some pictures. This is the largest ziggurat in the world was built by the Elamites. It was near the ancient city of Susa. But this is not the picture of Susa. This is the ziggurat that was dedicated as a temple to one of their gods. It's the largest ziggurat in the world and one of the best preserved in the world as well. And this is their capital city of Susa. You'll learn more about Susa if you go and read books like Ezra and Nehemiah. Anyway, there you go. We finished. Oh, and we had to get through a lot. We don't normally, we do 1 or 2 chapters at a time, but this was one of those
Whenever you're trying to get through 4, 5, 6, 7.
We had to go pretty epic with it.
Yes, sir.
I remember. You guys' house?
Well, we got a lot done.
Yeah.
I remember. Finally.
Yeah. Well, that's heavy duty. I like that. Thanks for thinking of me, Anita. Yeah, that'll be good.